So, in the background of this is this theme of Eros. And let me say one more thing. I would suggest that one of the great accomplishments of Plato is to reinterpret Eros. If you read Thucydides' history of the Peloponnesian War, the word Eros occurs about 6 times. And Eros isn't just sexual passion in ancient Greek, but it's any kind of really powerful passion. And when it occurs in Thucydides, it's essentially a dirty word. It's like, for example, in the Sicilian expedition, he says, an Eros for the expedition fell upon the Athenians. And the Greek word fall is the same word you'd use if a disease sort of fell upon. And so what Plato does is he says it's not Eros. The problem isn't Eros. It's the objects of Eros. What human beings have a passion for is money and power and pleasure and so forth. We've got to redirect it toward these transcendent things. So this is very rich background, I think, for these discussions.
And the Christian ascetics end up recapturing Eros, although in the Bible itself, it's not the word that's used the most. For sure, the ascetics end up bringing the word back. And so you read the ascetics talk about Eros as the prime, let's say the prime drive towards union with God, and that it is actually Eros that leads us into theosis. So you can see that they really bring back some of these ideas that are there in Plato. If I like my very, very Christian reading of the Symposium, so I'm not gonna even apologize for that, but so what I see, like when I remember the Symposium, is that what makes the difference, it seems that there's something, Socrates is trying to do something with Alcibiades.
Yes.
Like he recognizes the Eros, and he knows in some ways that this Eros, like Jacob, like you said, this is the means by which you can reach up. And he seems to be trying to transform his Eros, and he does it in different ways. He does it by kind of bringing him close to him, and then refusing him in some ways, or refusing his advances, and then trying to kind of turn his advances. So there seems to be, I think that this is going to sound, like I said, very Christian, but it seems like there's something of asceticism in what Socrates is trying to do. It's like, if you experience loss, of what you desire, and you're able to kind of do that with the right attitude or the right mindset, then it's like a trampoline, or it's a new ground on which you can reach higher, And so if you to some degree tame or refuse some of your immediate passions, right, and you kind of hold them, then you put yourself in a position where you can maybe glimpse through them to something more.
Of course, Plato compares philosophy to seduction, to being seduced.
At one point, Alcibiades is talking about how Socrates behaved in battle, right? And he says, the guy was a great warrior. And so he says, and nobody could enjoy a feast like Socrates could. But then again, when food was scarce, nobody could stand up to hunger, the way he could.
So in some ways, like you said, he is trying to reach into the sphere of the gods. He is trying to move up vertically towards that which should be the place of the gods. And what's interesting about that is that's why he can also live in this world of horizontality in a way that is celebratory, right? So it's like, because his Eros isn't directed towards food, he can enjoy a feast without becoming a slave of his belly, right? Because his Eros isn't, and so because of that, and right, in some ways, that's like kind of the secret of asceticism in some ways, right? Is that if you don't live for the pleasures, you end up actually being able to find pleasure in the world more than you did before. It's Chesterton that kept saying that. It's like, when I became a Christian and I stopped just thinking about cigars and food, and all of a sudden I enjoyed my cigars and my food more than before, because my direction was changed. I wasn't just running after the things of this world. So there's an interesting idea that the fact that in some ways Socrates is beyond what Aristophanes says is why he can look up, let's say.
Because he's not chaotic to begin with. The internal guidance system is Eros. And you're absolutely right, John. The ultimate object of Eros is beyond intelligibility, right? I mean, he calls it the beautiful here. Let's say the good in the Republic, right? You can't look at the sun. You can't, good is beyond being. But so let's go back to what Jonathan was saying about the horizontal and the vertical, right? So when Socrates looks at another human being, what does he see? He sees the glimmer. First, he sees we have that ladder of Eros, and that's an articulated ascent, right? So you look, and remember how he says you fall in love with another body, then you fall in love with the soul. By the way, this is phenomenologically correct, right? You go back to when you're a kid and you're like, oh, she's cute or something, and then you realize you're actually interested in the soul of this individual and so forth. So he relates horizontally because he knows that the horizontal leads up. And so with this account, there's this internal guidance system and it leads you up. And I agree with you, Jonathan. This is what accounts both for his equanimity and his ability to enjoy, to be with other human beings. And it's the secret of community. What is community? It is both the unity and diversity. That
it seemed like there was an idea in Socrates that the vertical dimension, the anagogic dimension, in which he's caught up in kind of a paradoxical relationship to the non-intelligible source of intelligibility, that allows him, right, equanimity in the face of the extremes of the human spirit. I heard that argument sort of emerging, right? So it's not that he has stepped out of his humanity, because he can feast, but he can also, right? So I'm hearing it say you coming together saying, like, you get into this relationship, right, and it's incompletable and everything, right, and in that sense it's properly paradoxical. But if you live the verticality of the paradox, you can get equanimity within the horizontality of the extremes of the human spirit. I'm hearing that argument being made. Is that landing as
No, I think at least that's what I really think that it's actually what makes something real is its connection to the vertical relationship. And so but
it has to connect to vertical in a way that allows the tension of the horizontal to be livable, right? So that people don't lose their humanity. Socrates' equanimity is the preservation of his humanity, even as it's torn between all of these extremes that we've been talking about. That's what I'm also hearing the argument drawing together. Did I just impose that on you, Jonathan, or is that fair?
No, I totally agree with that.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And I would also point out here that the vertical dimension is not going to work if it's conceived in the way Aristophanes conceives it, because what's on the top is Zeus, and Zeus is just force. It's just
he's just a big rapist on the top of the mountain.
Right, exactly. So you've got to have a Socratic or religious conception of this vertical. There has to be transcendence up here, and only then are you going to get this.
Socrates is the metaxu this way that can give us. I think equanimity is a good word. Equanimity between tragedy and comedy of human life.
And so also this vertical dimension. I should mention that one of the things Socrates does in any dialogue, right, is so we start down here and we go up, right, to a sort of high universal set of questions. Socrates is sort of always this weaving motion, right? We're not going to like take off into go to the moon and not come down. We're going to come back down, right? That is to say, we talk about courage so we can be courageous. And tragedy and comedy, this relates to it, because if you're sort of on the ground and you're looking up, right, that's one perspective. But if you're high and you're looking down, I would suggest that's sort of the comic perspective, right? And in fact, Kierkegaard has something about this also in Concluding on Scientific Postscript. When you look up from beneath with the divine sort of in prospect, it's tragic. But when you look down and you turn around and it's behind you, it's comic.
Don't you think in some ways, because I just keep having Dante that just keeps flashing back at me, because it seems like Dante is working all this out in the comedy. The problem of all these of all these, his whole thing is about Eros, basically, right? I mean, Dante, everything that he writes is about Eros. Everything is about how the problem of desire and the proper alignment of desire and the proper directionality of desire. And then in some ways, that's also what Dante does, is to reconcile tragedy and comedy in that text. Because obviously the beginning of that story is clearly tragic. And then once you move up, you have this transformation that occurs.
I think you're right, Jacob. The up and down. I mean, D.C. Schindler in Plato's Critique of Impure Reason makes an excellent argument, right? And you even see it in the myth of the sun. You go out, but you go back down, right? The up and the down are always have to be maintained. They both have to be addressed. If the absolute does not reach into the relative, it's not truly absolute. And things like those kinds of arguments, which of course Christianity has done some amazing things with. But for me, it's still, I like, what is it? What is it that makes Dante? A lot of people, their Eros is disproportionate. It's out of proportion. It lacks ratio. I mean, that's why Virgil is there to remind us that, right? Virgil represents ratio in a really important way, right? But where, like, where comes forth the drive to bring proper proportion to one's Eros?
All right. Okay. I see what you mean. Yeah.
Yeah. Where does it come from?
I mean, I think it comes from suffering. I think it comes from suffering. That's what I mean, I think that it's when we suffer that we have the sobriety to measure our Eros. Like, it seems to me that
but we can also, because of our suffering, turn into resentment.
That's right.
Rage, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Suffering is an opportunity, you could say. But you're asking, why would one choose one and one choose the other? I understand your question. That's a tough one.
I'm going to keep pounding on this, because this is, for me, I agree with the argument that's been made, and you said I understood it properly. The vertical, right? The vertical relation with the paradox allows you to properly proportion, right? The horizontal tensions, and that gives you equanimity, and that's why the two are completely, the up and down is. I think that's a good argument, but for me, I think, one of the criticisms, not criticism, one of the comments that David makes is, you see in Plato, and Luchnik does too, and Plato keeps trying to find the starting point. Like, where does this start? How does it start? And I'm sorry, he's infected me with this question. It's like, yes, but what is it? Like, and I think about this. I think about the person who wants to offer the logos in the face of the sophist, the complete sophist, like sort of Derrida on amphetamines or something, right? It's like what? Like, they're going to keep saying, they're just going to keep saying, oh, but they're going to do the hermeneutics of suspicion. Because underneath it all, what causes the proportion is just a deeper desire that you're not acknowledging, and that's the deeper desire for dominance or power, because that's the deepest and most, and they have no justification for making that argument. I'm not agreeing with that argument. I'm just trying to ask the question of what is it that turns us.
Death is the cure for this problem, and that sounds like a horrible thing to say, but it seems to be what that is that dying is the capacity to change, and the suffering and death is the capacity to notice the gap, right? It's like when you suffer, you see the gap. And so the weird thing about the Christian answer seems to be something like choose to die on purpose. Seems to be the answer to it. It's like, if you accept dying without it happening to you, then that is what will reorganize your Eros. And Jacob, what you said about getting older, I think I'm experiencing it obviously because I'm almost 50. I'm getting older and everything. And so, isn't that crazy?
50 was a long time ago, man.
Yeah, for me.
But what I mean is, but what I mean is that I can see that my body is diminishing, right? I can see that. And so I also notice that my desires could not diminish.
Hmm.
Right. And then I see around me, because I'm, like I said, I'm coming close to 50. I see those 52, 53-year-old guys who crack and, like leave their wife and buy a sports car and, marry some 20-year-old or whatever. And it's like, and in some ways I'm noticing that if I die, like if I accept the death of my body, and I let's say it becomes an opportunity for me to reorient Eros. And so death is actually an opportunity for me to be saved from my desires. Like my body giving out is actually a wonderful thing if I can take it in the proper way, where I can see it happening and notice that it's like, oh, those things that I wanted, like I want to be beautiful, I want to be in shape, I want to be this. It's like, you know what? I kind of have to let that go, because it's going to happen to me now or later. I'm going to end a frail, decomposing body just like everybody else. And so I could hold on to that and be the tough guy and try to look like I'm 25 until I'm 60, but I can't do that until I'm 80. Like I'm going to hit that limit. I might as well die consciously. And I can notice that it's doing that to me. Like it's reorienting my desires necessarily.
But Plato does the same thing. Philosophy is a preparation for death.
Hmm.
I'm trying to get clear. So is it, I mean, I don't want to turn you into Heidegger or something. Is it, it's something like in Tolstoy, Ivan Ilyich always knew he was going to die, the way you know that 2 + 2 = 4. But now Ivan Ilyich knew he was going to die. There's a non-propositional waking up to your mortality. So is there a proposal here from you, Jonathan, that what can make the turn is somebody properly awakening to their mortality? But for that to genuinely be the case, it's not something they do, it's something that has to strike them, it's something they have to suffer. If you just state your mortality, you're not actually experiencing your mortality. Do you understand what I'm trying to convey?
It probably depends on people. Like some people, they won't necessarily need a massive blow from life for that to happen to them. And then some people you meet that have gotten that massive blow, and then if they take it properly, they're transfigured. You can, I've met several people like that.
Okay.
But then you can also keep your mind, like what a recent saint in the Orthodox Church said, keep your mind in death all the time. You have to remember death. Like that's how you do it all the time.
I think this is a good answer, and I'm starting to feel like my question is being addressed. So it makes me now make this proposal to you, that all of this feeds into a fundamental thing within the Platonic framework, which is the notion of participation, about the relationship. The relation of participation that constitutes the vertical axis, but also constitutes how the horizontal things are bound together. Go ahead.
You talked to Father Maxis about that, like the idea of synergy. Like it's a beautiful way to portray it.
Exactly. Yeah.
Like in some ways, it's like you just you can't do it on your own. But you open the door, this little sliver, and then a bit of light comes in, and then it kind of gives you the courage to open it a bit more. And so there's this call and response mechanism, you could say.
Yeah, I agree. But you have to understand a self as something that is inherently participatory and dialogical in nature, and that's the Kierkegaardian. And also, I think the Socratic answer, right? The self is something that is inherently dialogical and therefore inherently participatory through and through.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. I mean, look, so the self can't be understood without pointing to what is not the self. The answer to the question of how this question of self-transcendence, I think in the Platonic context, we're going to have to go back to Eros, right?
Exactly.
Right. So that, Eros can provide this ladder or can provide this relationship. Alcibiades is Aristophanic in the sense that he's really seeking his other half in a way. Like it's all about himself. His Eros is directed toward this vision of who Alcibiades could be. And looking out to the other, and then and then of course this weird Kierkegaardian thing as well, right? That love of self turns into love of another, but then that love of the other is actually the fullest self-fulfillment.
You bring up Kierkegaard. Aren't we ultimately proposing the final transformation, right? Plato does transforming Eros, and then of course Plotinus also puts it in motion, right? And then Christianity comes and sort of says, but in the end, the love that puts you into a relationship with the other, by which you come to fulfillment, is agape, right? Because that is right. That is the love that creates the other, that then nevertheless has come from you. Like, because the model is the parent with the child, and of course the giving birth is all through the Symposium as well. So is that what we're coming to here? That when we like what turns us is that we are turned when we participate in the transformation that is always available to us of Eros into agape. Is that now coming out? Because if I'm just drawn to the other rather than participating in the selfhood of the other, there's still aggression, there's still violence at the heart of it. It's only in agape where the resolution could finally come to be seen. Because there I am, it looks like violence because I'm creating the other, but it's exactly the opposite of violence. I am giving myself over to the full giving and participating in the other becoming a self beyond me and other than me, but nevertheless in relationship with me.
You know what I like about that is actually that's a wonderful description of how Kierkegaard regards Socrates, right? In other words,
yes.
You know, here's the thing about Socrates. When Socrates is relating to you, you are the center of the universe. He is relating to you. There's a very beautiful a book called The Last of the Wine, and it has a description of Socrates speaking to the main character. And he's a boy, you know, and Socrates comes and sits down next to him in the grammar school, and the kid turns around and looks at him. He says, "No adult ever looked at me like that." Like his eyes were just on me. It was about me.
And that gaze, but the gaze is not, you know, the consumative gaze. It's the midlifing gaze. It's the gaze that is helping you to give birth, right? It's affording you to give birth to yourself.
Exactly.
So could the difference be the degree to which agape is alive in them is the degree to which they can waken up? Is that a possibility that rings with the two of you in any way?
So in some ways you would suggest that it's not just a self-willed thing, right? That you could encounter someone, you know, that would provoke, like by their communion, by the way they look at you, by the way they treat you, that they could provoke in you that response.
Yes.
Yeah, I think it's definitely one of the possibilities. Definitely.
I like it.
Yeah.
It's very good.